Welcome to the Florida Keys Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, April Struess, and today we are going to discuss building your dream home in the Florida Keys. When it comes to building a home in the Florida Keys, it is important to understand the Keys building process and guidelines. Lucky for us, we have our guest today is Don Horton with Island Construction Management, who is going to guide us on the process of building a home in the Keys. Welcome, Don.
Well, thanks, April. Nice to be here with you.
Thanks for joining us. So, Don, tell us about yourself and your company.
Well, so actually, April, I have two companies. I have Island Construction Management, which is my consulting company. We do construction management and we do permitting and permit expediting. And I do a lot of expert witness testimony related to building codes and codes down here in the Keys. And then I've got DHorton Construction, which is my construction company. And we've got about 7 guys that work with us. And my daughter, Amy, runs the office. And we are currently building 6 new homes in between Islamorada and Key Largo, and are doing 3 renovation jobs too.
That's great. So that's great because not only do you build homes, that you can also, if anyone has any issues or with code violations or so forth, you also have that consulting side of it as well, which is a big help.
Just so you know, I actually retired from government work. I was the county's building official and the city of Islamorada's building official before starting my consulting and construction company back after about 16 years with both Monroe County and with the city of Islamorada.
Which is also great because then you're really familiar with the codes and the permit process of everything. So Don, I get a lot of buyers who'll call me looking for a vacant lot because they want to build their dream home in the Keys. So let's start with lots. What is, now I know obviously down here we're a little different than the rest of the country. How does our lots work down here? I know we have our tier system. Can you kind of explain what that is and what is a buildable, non-buildable lot here in the Keys?
Well, so April, there's a difference between building in the city of Islamorada, which is an incorporated area in Monroe County, and unincorporated Monroe County. Unincorporated Monroe County actually does have the tier system. The tier system is just a method of determining the environmental sensitivity of a particular piece of property. So a tier 3 piece of property is normally what we call a scarified or a disturbed piece of property, and a tier 1 piece of property is a piece of property that has a lot of vegetation, a lot of natural native vegetation, which in many instances is protected. So if somebody wanted to build a house, as quickly as possible in Monroe County, where they'd be looking for a tier 3 piece of property. And I think that would be important to ask their realtor, what tier system is, what tier is this property in?
Okay. And you mentioned something though. So Monroe County obviously has a tier system, and the Villages, City of Marathon, do they have a whole nother system, or is it, how does their system work?
Well, so yeah, in the city of Islamorada and in certain areas in the incorporated area of Marathon, they have, they don't have the tier system. They require you to hire a biologist. The biologist would go on any particular piece of property and make a determination whether the property is disturbed with hammock, or disturbed with or hammock property. There's also a lot of other environmental categories like wetland or other areas that would need to be conserved as well. So finding out what is on any individual piece of property, whether it's in the county or in the incorporated areas of Marathon or Islamorada, is really important as you get started down the road of wanting to buy a lot and then building a house.
Got it. No, that's good to know. So you mentioned the word hammock. Now, a lot of people who aren't from the Keys might not understand what a hammock is or why that's important, along with, conservation easement. So when you say hammock, what are you referring to?
That's a great question. A hammock is a piece of property that's dominated by native vegetation. We've got a lot of native trees down here that are protected. A lot of them are federally protected. A lot of them are protected in the state, and a lot of them are considered threatened or endangered species here in Monroe County. So when you've got a lot that's full of native vegetation, those properties are likely called hammock lots. And then you mentioned something about conservation easements, and that's what happens if you've got a lot that's deemed as a hammock, then the county and the village requires you to put those areas that you do not clear into conservation easements, and those are easements that run on the property where you can't do any further clearing, and they run in perpetuity with the land. You're really not supposed to go in there and disturb it any further, even if it's on your 60 by 110 foot lot. So let's say that you have a property that's disturbed with hammock, then you're only allowed to clear a certain percentage of that property. Most instances, it's about 50%. And so if you've got a 6,600 square foot lot, you can only clear 3,300 square feet. And really, the Monroe County has a regulation that it doesn't matter how big your property is. It could be a 10-acre piece of property. On some of these high-quality hammocks, you can't clear any more than 7,500 square feet. Once you're through disturbing or clearing that 7,500 square feet, which includes a construction impact zone of 5 feet beyond where the actual footprint of the proposed house is, then that's all you can clear on that piece of property. So it really is important to do your homework and rely on your professional realtor to help you understand what piece of property you're looking at and how important it is to determine if there's hammock or not.
That was really good information, because I know I'll get sometimes a call to say, yeah, I'm going to go and I'll just, wipe the trees away. And I'm like, oh, you can't just do that. So if someone comes and say, I don't care, I'm going to clear the lot. I'm assuming there's a huge fine. How they can clear a certain part, but if they want to clear all of it, they can't, obviously. And how, really what can happen if they do that?
Oh, April, there are so many pieces of property in Monroe County that people have cleared without a permit. And when they got caught, they actually have to go in. So many people have had to pay enormous fines. Other people have had to transplant their property. And oftentimes, depending on the size of the vegetation that's on the property, you could have to go buy, $100,000 or more in plants just to be able to do mitigation planting on a piece of property. So it's one of those things that we need to just respect our environment.
Right.
We need to respect the codes that we live in, and just be a smart buyer.
Right. Well, there's a reason why these are in place, because we want to keep the keys what the keys are and not strip them bare. Just take down all the trees and it wouldn't remain the keys. So moving on from hammock. So say I have a buyer, they want to buy a canal lot. They want to be on the water, but they have all these mangroves on the canal. So it kind of interferes with them building their dock. Can they remove those mangroves, or is there a certain percentage they can remove?
When we permit work on the water, whether it's a dock in a canal or it's a dock on the open water, all of our permitting has to first go to the Army Corps and the Department of Environmental Protection. And then it goes to either the county or to the village of Islamorada. So you start off with your application of can I build this dock on this piece of property, and get approvals through the Army Corps of Engineers, which is a federal agency, and then the Department of Environmental Protection, which is a state agency. When you apply to the Army Corps of Engineers, there's actually about another 15 governmental entities involve your application. And the reason for that is because, the importance of our environment. You can clear a certain percentage on a canal of your mangroves, you can clear a certain percentage of open water. You can also build what we call marginal docks or pile supported wood docks. And with a pile supported wood dock, sometimes you just need to pop out a little 4-foot area and clear that area, and then bring your dock in a T configuration out on the waterward side of those mangroves. So you can leave the mangroves. Depending on the size of the mangroves, you can prune them, you can hedge them, and oftentimes a lot of people will do that, and it makes a nice buffer between a canal system in your backyard.
So there's options. It's just knowing what options works best for that lot. Is really, yeah. Okay. So we got the lot. We found a buildable lot. The buyer's happy with the lot. Now it's time to actually start the permit process. So once again, permit process may be a little different than what other people are used to in different parts of the country. So we have a process called ROGO. What is ROGO? How does that work? What is it?
It is unique to the Keys. ROGO stands for Rate of Growth Ordinance. And then, of course, I guess every city has to be a little bit different. Mm-hmm. So in the city of Islamorada, it's called the BPAS, or the Building Permit Allocation System. Both of those are competitive in nature. Monroe County only issues a certain number of single-family residential units per quarter, and the same in Islamorada. They only issue a certain number of residential allocations per quarter. Those quarters start in January. So you've got January, and then April, and then it goes on every 3 months. They actually score your application, and in the city of Islamorada, it's usually the top 6 that score that would then get an allocation. But once you're granted an allocation in both the county and the city, then shortly after, you're issued a building permit to build your single family house. Both of those, as I said, are competitive in nature. So the person who gets in first and the person who scores the highest points is higher on the ranking, is that then gets a building permit. There's several different methods in order to get the scoring. For instance, in Monroe County, you get extra points if you're outside of like areas of Big Pine Key and No Name Key and those. You can get points for being in a tier 3. Additional points for being in a tier 3, and we talked about the tier 3 being a disturbed piece of property. So a tier 3 piece of property actually gets 30 points in Monroe County. If you're in a tier 1, then you get you only get 10 points. You get for being in a points for being in a platted subdivision with water, sewer, and paved roads available, and then you get additional points. Well, in the city of Islamorada, for conservation savings items on your house, like high efficiency air conditioning, and putting in solar panels, putting in a cistern to save on water reuse, or for sprinkling your yard and things like that. There's a lot of points that are assigned for land dedication in the county, and there are some points for land dedication in Islamorada as well. Sounds silly, but you can actually buy a piece of property, and depending on how buildable that piece of property is, you get additional points, oftentimes as many as 10 points, just for buying a piece of property and then removing the development right on that piece of property in order to develop on your particular piece of property. You get negative. We're in several flood zones, so you get negative points, many negative points for being in a V zone or a velocity zone. those are usually directly on the ocean or directly on the bay. You get negative points for being in what's called an A zone or an AE flood zone. Those are oftentimes as we move further in the middle towards the middle of the island. And those are where you get rising and falling water. The A basically stands for alluvial. It's so floods similar to what happens in the Ohio or Mississippi River Valley basins. So those obviously only usually occur on major hurricanes, but they still are those that we have to, build to and recognize flood zones on a piece of property. We've got a flood zone called an X flood zone, and that means that either the 100-year flood or the 500-year flood, you shouldn't get any flooding whatsoever. Those you get positive points for because both the village and Monroe County want to steer development into those areas which would have the least potential impact on a piece of property.
Okay, that makes sense. That was a lot of good information.
It's a lot to consume.
Yeah, that is a lot to consume, but it's good to kind of hear how it's drawn out. So say you have someone, they have a tier 3, they've done everything they possibly can to get as many points as possible. And I know this is a very vague question, a hard question to answer. Is there a time frame they can rely on? Does it depend on how many permits are in place? That depends on, I'm sure there's so many factors, but is there a general 6 months, a year and a half? Is there kind of a time frame you can if you have someone looking to build a house that you'd kind of tell them or not?
Well, in the county, if all of the stars are in line and you're in an X flood zone and you're not in a hammock, you put your application in and it goes through. It could be as less than a year.
Okay.
And I know that sounds silly. People that maybe listen to this podcast is my gosh, I live in North Carolina and I can get a permit for my house in a week.
Right.
But we're people want to live here in our paradise, and so there's a lot of people competing. Now in Islamorada, it's even a little more difficult. All of the stars aligned and all of your points in place, the perfect lot. You could still very well be waiting a couple of years before you would get a building permit, because there are, I think in Islamorada, something in excess of 50 applicants that are already in the system and competing for a building permit. So,
wow.
Really in Islamorada, the best thing to do is to either buy a piece of property that's going to have an allocation coming out, one that already has an allocation, or find that perfect dream home that's already built in Islamorada.
Right. So one kind of skipping around, you mentioned something. So now, can a property be Robo exempt? And if it is, because would that be a way to kind of skip through the process?
Well, no property can be Robo exempt. There are properties that already do have a Robo allocation, and so you can buy piece of property with the allocation already issued.
So sorry, I think I misspoke. Okay, so say, and maybe trying to say the same thing. So someone buys a property with a mobile home, they can tear down their mobile home and build their dream home. With that, do they still have to go through the whole process, or no, since there's a house on it?
No, BPAS in Rogo is only for new development. Certainly you can buy a piece of property and you could buy a mobile home, or you could buy an older house or a small house. And as long as the replacement structure, meets our code as far as wind load and flood zones and setbacks, you can certainly replace that home without having to go through either Rogo or BPAS. And in either instance, it doesn't matter if you buy a 1,500 square foot home and want to build a 3,000 square foot home, you could still do that as long as you meet, the setbacks and those other code requirements that are in our local codes.
Okay, got it. permit fees. Obviously, the cost is going to change depending on the size of the house, what they build. But what are some common fees that the owner should be aware of, what they're going to have to pay to get the permits?
April, that's a moving target. It's true. It depends on the size of the home. It depends on the amount of clearing.
Okay.
So there are a lot of factors that are included in building permit fees. I can tell you that they are expensive, and permits can be in the permit fees can be in the low tens of thousands for sure.
Okay. Okay. Moving on, you mentioned that only they issued so many permits per quarter. Now, jumping to the whole, I think now it's 2023 moratorium. What is that?
Okay, so many years ago, before 1986, the state of Florida was very concerned about Monroe County's hurricane evacuation and how fast we can actually evacuate in the event of a major hurricane, another Hurricane Andrew or something that's coming through. They did a fairly comprehensive traffic study, and they found that given a number of trips that are calculated per single family house, per hotel, trailer park, low-lying areas, RV parks, and those kind of things, that we needed to be able to evacuate all of Monroe County in a 24-hour period. So their goal is to have us evacuated 72 hours for landfall of a hurricane, and done within 24 hours. When they calculated all of that, they determined that we would be out of trips by actually the first was by 2000, and then in 2000 they did another study and moved that to 2010, and then in 2010 they realized that they felt like they made an error and they moved it to 2023. 2023 is right around the corner, and it's the state still says that we are going to reach a saturation or build out by 2023 at the rate that we were issuing permits per quarter. So Monroe County decided that they would slow that rate down. So Monroe County's build out as a county, as the permitting agency, should be sometime in 2025. As far as the city of Islamorada, we should reach build out by June of 2023. So what does that mean? Well, you got to still back up to before 1986. Monroe County was declared an area of state critical concern, where the state wanted us to be cognizant of our environmental sensitivity. And so the state is actually determines much of what Monroe County can do, all of Monroe County, including the incorporated areas. So the state mandates how many permits we can issue, and the state mandates when they feel that we've reached saturation. And again, they feel like Islamorada will reach it in 2023 and Monroe County in 2025. So there'll only be redevelopment unless the state can go back and look at the actuarials and come up with another number that would be acceptable to the state to allow us to build additional houses.
Wow, that's a lot of good information. So yeah, no, that's important to know. So if you're looking to build, say I'm going to wait 10 years and build a house, you might want to reconsider that, or you might not be able to at all at that time.
Sure. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So we got our permit, we're ready to build. And again, I know this is a very open question, but how long does it usually take to build a typical home in the Keys? I know depending on weather, material, etc. But when you have a buyer, when you have a client who says, build my dream home, is there a timeline you give them, or what do you usually tell them?
Well, we build predominantly concrete block and steel houses down here. So there's curing times between each pour, and many of our homes are increasingly larger and larger. So we live on a coral reef. Many areas are filled areas where they dug the canals and filled in, an undeveloped area to elevate the ground. So in a lot of instances, we either have to drill holes into our solid rock, or we drive piling. And so we drive the piling, we pour the ground slab and the foundation, and we go up with columns so that we can get our houses elevated at or above the base flood elevation by at least a foot. And then we would pour an elevated slab. And oftentimes we do that multiple times as we go up into the air. Each time requires cure time on your concrete. So I would say that the typical 15, 18, 2,000 square foot home that's 1 or 2 levels is normally a 12-month process. They can certainly expand from there. We're building right now almost 7,000 square foot home down in Lower Matacumbe, and that house is projected to be an 18-month house.
Okay, so about 12-month average, depending. Now you mentioned something about building above the flood zone. So say I bought a lot and the elevation certificate says the flood zone is AE 8. Can they build at 8, or does it have to be at 9? How does that work?
So you get additional points for building above the base flood elevation, and we are required by our Florida building code to build at least a foot above the base flood elevation. Additional foot is called design flood elevation. So we're required simply by our building code to, if you're in the AE8, to have your first living floor at least at 9 foot mean sea level.
Okay. So that's another cost. Obviously, the prospective owner should consider. Another thing is that, I hear people like, well, how much does it cost to build in the Keys? Obviously, it's probably more than other places, but what makes it more expensive than other parts of the country to build in the Keys? Is it our materials? Is it what we have to do? Is our codes? What are your thoughts?
So it's a combination of all of that, April. Certainly we live on an island where we're basically 70 miles from downtown Miami, so all of our materials comes from the mainland, and that's where all of our resources are. So everything is trucked down or shipped down
Right.
to us, and so our material costs are higher, our concrete costs are higher, and quite honestly, because of where we live, our labor costs are higher. A lot of our labor drives down from the mainland. So a lot of them have an hour drive. I've got 3 of my guys that work for me drive from the mainland, and they each have an hour drive, an hour commute before they get down to the job site. Of course, the expense of gas and all of that drives up the cost of our labor. So it's a combination of materials. It's a combination of labor that drives our cost up. Although I would say, I don't know if it's good or bad, but right now we're probably competitive with places like California. I was talking to a client of mine the other day, and he asked me the same question: is, well, Don, what's it cost, just roughly ballpark per square foot to build a house? Probably the typical house down here right now starts around $400 a square foot. And he was impressed because in California, starts off at a minimum of $500 a square foot, but certainly it can go up. And I've built homes that are very custom homes and very high end for well over $700-800 a square foot.
Right. Well, I think it comes down to, yes, we're in the Keys, and it's an island, and it's a beautiful place. Our waterways are gorgeous, and if you want to live here, you will have to pay for it. But once you're here, there's really no place like it. So I think it comes down to that. But I think I really appreciate you talking to us today. That was such great information about lots, about building in the keys, about the whole permit process. I think that answered a lot of questions. And you answered a lot of questions I get quite a bit. So that was very helpful. I appreciate that, Don. Is there anything else that you think of that we missed out on or that you should mention about if someone is considering building in the keys?
No, I think that touches upon it, April. I think that it's important for people to realize, like you said, that they're moving. They're thinking, they're contemplating about building in our paradise, and we've got to. We do have some strict regulations, and but certainly everybody comes here because of how beautiful our area is and our waters are, and without those strict regulations, a lot of those gorgeous and beautiful factors that we have down here would be depleted. So I think they've through the years found the balance between man and our environment, and as long as we all come down here and build the way we're supposed to build and respect our environment and our communities, I think we'll all get along fine.
Those are very good points, Don. Well, thank you for joining us, Don. If the listeners would like to reach out to you with interest in building in the Keys, how can they contact you?
So, April, my email address is don@ICM, that's the initials for Island Construction Management, .build. So it's not .com, it's .BUILD, like we're going to build a house. My cell phone number is area code 305-522-2062. And my office number is area code 305-852-9607.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. Thank you all for listening to my show, the Florida Keys Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, April Struess. If you have any questions about real estate in the Florida Keys, please feel free to reach out to me through my website at www.floridakeyssearch.com or give me a call at 305-399-6297. Have a wonderful day.